life's greatest questions seem like a mystery? Well, we're probably going to talk about it here at Appalachian Liturgy. Important questions like, are you a Jedi or an Imperial? Is oatmeal actually a breakfast cereal? Is a Catholic weekday really called a ferial? Did you know that Mr. Rogers was Presbyterial? So join us as we have a little fun talking about thy kingdom come. Appalachian Liturgy.
Okay, welcome everyone to our next episode of the Appalachian Liturgy podcast. I am Justin Stacy.
And I'm Brooke Atchley.
And I'm Justin Bowen.
And tonight we have our guest, Father Boyd. Father Boyd is a priest in the Episcopal Church. He is a rector of St. Thomas in Abingdon and a scientist. So I think that's a very interesting story of a scientist to priesthood. So do you mind giving us a brief intro?
Sure. It's hard to keep that brief, but I will try my darndest. So yes, I was a scientist at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory for 23 years until I'd had all the fun I could stand and decided I wanted to do something else for the second half of my working career. In general, I like variety, and I felt like Oak Ridge was a very difficult, challenging place to work. I loved the work, but the red tape of working for the government was pretty crazy. Could be a very misery making. But while I was in Oak Ridge, my wife Kathy and I, we were very involved in youth ministry, be that at the church or as scout leaders. I think that's a ministry too. And during that time, I was asked to join the church board of our Episcopal church and help it. And I thought, wow, I can get some more visibility for my youth ministry if I do this. And then I got to see how the sausage was made. And but I actually found that very meaningful. It was actually a very fulfilling time in my life serving on that board. Even though the church was in a very difficult time, there was a lot of conflict in that particular parish that I wasn't aware of, and the finances were not good at the time, and our membership was declining. And so I ended up being the senior warden, which is the head of the church board, and really felt the Spirit guiding me during that time, I think, and leading me and helping me rebuild that church. I really felt like that. And interestingly, during that time, are we still here?
Yep.
I lost y'all for a second. Interesting, during that time, Kathy and I made a little trip to Italy, and in Italy we visited St. Francis's church, where he heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Rebuild my church." And I was very concerned about the state of the church at that time, and felt that same call as well. Now my faith was very important to me, even as a scientist. Prayer was very important to me. I worked in several different areas, nanotechnology being one of them. Worked in a clean room with some very sophisticated but cantankerous equipment, and often had to pray over the equipment or pray for the demons to be cast out of it when it wouldn't behave.
I can understand that.
Maybe that's what we need to do with Stacy's internet connection.
Yeah. But I really found prayer working. Prayer was a very important part of my life, and I felt guided and led. And then I had come to the decision that it was getting close to time to leave Oak Ridge. And right around that time, the opportunity or pathway opened up to go to seminary. And Kathy and I had paid off almost all of our debt, pretty debt free, and just seemed like, well, why not? It really felt like that's where the Spirit was leading us and guiding us.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for that. It's a very, very interesting story to priesthood.
Absolutely. I love hearing
Um,
people's stories about how they're called to whatever it is that they're being called to.
Yeah. All right, good stuff. Well, tonight we are going to try to talk about a bit about Thanksgiving. The Thanksgiving's coming up, and we're going to try to tie that in with the Eucharist, because the Eucharist in Greek means Thanksgiving. So I thought that would be a very appropriate for this episode. So I guess first, what Thanksgiving traditions do you all celebrate? Are you going to be celebrating this year with the pandemic going on? And what traditions does the church normally do for Thanksgiving? I guess that's where we can kick it off.
I'll go.
Oh, go ahead.
So for us, Christmas is always a really hard time for us to travel because of all the special services and stuff. So we always traveled for Thanksgiving. So we would normally travel and spend Wednesday evening dinner with my husband's family and all of the slew of kids. And, it's just a kind of a raucous affair. It used to be that his side of the family was a very serious kind of occasion, exquisite tablescapes, and it was all set out. His mom used to host all the fancy dishes and everything. And then on Thursday, we would spend it with my side of the family. And we used to laugh that it was like total opposite. So his side of the family was very formal. You kind of dressed up. You had play settings with your names at the table. And my side of the family, it's just kind of chaos. And we ate off of like chinette. That's what my kids would say. Like, we didn't just have the paper plates. We had like chinette. But it was just loud and gregarious. And we were a competitive bunch, so we always played games. So if the weather was good, there was always lawn darts and cornhole and ladder ball. And I mean, we went hardcore with like tournament brackets and stuff and ping pong games. And so most of that, actually none of that is happening this year. So we're going to be together with just kind of our immediate family and have a low-key Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bolling.
Oh yeah. So I guess the weirdest part for Thanksgiving for us, the first couple of years we got married, was trying to figure out a rhythm of how we split the time, and we were terrible at it the first couple of years, and that's it was always something that we almost looked forward to and dreaded at the same time, because the tradition was always that my family would go over to my grandma's house, my mom's mom, and there would be like 30 or 40 people over there. It was a total free for all, like kind of Brooke was saying. It was just it's a mess. But they would eat about 2:00, while Sarah's parents would have her dad over and just a few other people, but they would eat about 4. And so there's only a 2-hour gap there. And when nobody really wanted to be the one that suggested, like, oh, hey, let's change the time. And so for the first few years, we just always, would go to one house and then go to the next one and eat. And then I was basically, comatose for the rest of the night because I couldn't do anything else but sit in a recliner and try to breathe. But yeah, we switched it up. Her dad doesn't come over there anymore, so we were able to kind of readjust the plans. But yeah, I think this year everything's going to be way more low key. We may go visit my parents and her parents, but it's not going to be the same type of rowdy event that it usually is in the past.
Yeah. What about you, Father Boyd?
Well, Thanksgiving is one of my favorite holidays, I think. And I think it's because there's lower expectations, or that's how I've always felt. It's not the pressure of Christmas and the high expectations, sometimes high anxiety, and sometimes emotions are a little frayed, I think at Christmas. But I've always gathered mostly with my father's family, and Kathy and I have carried on that tradition because we we typically lived in the same city with her family, so we saw them all the time. But Thanksgiving was a time when we could travel and see my parents. So that's more what we did. And so growing up, we would rotate between our house and one of my father's sister's houses, and typically there was a game of football in the front yard and football on the TV, and then lots of good food and fellowship, definitely. I think when I think of Thanksgiving, one of our traditional dishes in my family is garlic cheese grits with cornflakes baked on top. And so there has to be, in my opinion, garlic cheese grits. That's my favorite holiday dish is that.
I don't think I've ever tried that. That sounds pretty good.
I have had that before, but it's not something I associate with Thanksgiving, although I wouldn't complain. That sounds delicious.
So what food do you associate with Thanksgiving?
Broccoli casserole.
Sweet potato casserole.
And that as well.
Deviled eggs.
Deviled eggs.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, we got the smorgasbord here.
I've seen those Baby Yoda memes lately of the deviled eggs, and that's exactly the way I was when I was a kid. And my dad, that's exactly the way my dad is now. Like, he's always taking, the eggs when you shouldn't be taking them yet, but it doesn't matter. We're going to eat them. They're so good.
Yeah, so I so wanted to share that meme with like my whole family because but none of them watch it, and we're totally lost on them. But I feel you. With them.
Father Boyd, do you watch Mandalorian?
We do watch Mandalorian. We sort of grieved when we got through season 1. So we have been holding back on starting season 2 and have been rewatching season 1.
Okay.
Wanting to speed through season 2 the way we do.
Well, then you will know the scene. You will know, and you'll be like, "Oh, that is what they were talking about."
Yeah. Oh, he's probably seen it, the memes on social media this week.
I hate to say I haven't seen the Baby Yoda memes on social
well,
media.
you haven't been spoiled then.
I haven't seen the episode, but I have seen the memes, and I know what it refers to, unfortunately.
Baby Yoda is probably one of the best things that's ever happened to Star Wars.
It is.
They redeemed Jar Jar Binks with Baby Yoda.
Yeah,
this is true.
That is true. Honestly, I think the Mandalorian series, and I'm going to bank that any series that they come with, like the TV series, is going to be better than the movies. I like Mandalorian better than the last trilogy that we got.
Wasn't that Lucas's original vision for it to be a TV series? I feel like.
I don't know. Maybe.
Okay. Maybe I made that up. Don't take that as.
But it's so good as a series.
Absolutely with you that The Mandalorian is better than the last trilogy.
Yeah.
And I will say their special effects budget had to go up for season 2.
Yes, they absolutely did.
Yeah, it's so good.
Yep.
We are way in the weeds. So Stacey, tell us about Thanksgiving.
Oh yeah. So when I was a kid, we used to go to my grandma's, and my parents lived right beside of my grandma. Is my dad's parents. So we would go there for Thanksgiving, and my parents would be there, my aunts, uncles, their kids. It was just a big gathering at their house. And then my mom's grandma, my great grandma, and my great aunt would be. They would always stay at our house for Thanksgiving per my request. Like there would be times I would actually cry. And again, this was before I was even a teenager. This was, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This was 10 minutes ago. But no, I would want them to come to my house because one of the traditions that I just made myself, I guess, is I wanted to decorate the tree with my great grandma. And at some point, she got so old that she really couldn't do much with it. But when I was really young, she could help decorate the tree. And we always did that after Thanksgiving dinner. So that is the fondest memory that I have of Thanksgiving is what we done after Thanksgiving dinner is decorating the Christmas tree. Then, we kind of stopped going to my grandma's at some point, and then my mom took it over, and she's been making Thanksgiving dinner for the immediate family ever since. And this year, I think we are going to go to my mom's, but it's going to be a very, very small crowd. Thanksgiving is definitely, I love Thanksgiving. Since I've been married, I do have to eat 2 meals on that Thursday. Mostly for the exact same reason Bowling said. Like, no one's willing to bring up that someone should move the day or the time. So we just end up eating 2 meals.
So I'm telling you, the Wednesday night Thanksgiving thing is awesome because there's no pressure. You don't have to rush off and go to the other one.
Yeah.
It was the best thing that we did. But let's just talk for a minute about that family pressure, because I mean, when I'm counseling couples before they get married, one of the things that I say is, have you talked about the holidays and how you're going to spend it? Because it was it wasn't a stressor on our marriage per se, but it was such a stress managing the expectations of our families. And so that's one of the things that I say, talk about this now before 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. And, so
it can be an issue.
Yeah. So I was very happy when we split the days, because it felt like, because we were the first couple to get married especially Aaron's side of the family. And so, it wasn't until some of the others started getting married that people started realizing that, wow, this is really hard, So talk about it before. Figure it out.
All right. So I have a quote from a movie, and I was actually going through trying to think of Thanksgiving movies, and I couldn't think of many at all. It seems like that's not something that movies are based around a lot. So, but I did remember this one, and it's not really a Thanksgiving movie, but there is a play in which they are reenacting the first Thanksgiving. And here's the quote, and I'm going to see if anyone can actually guess what this is. All right. We cannot break bread with you. You have taken the land which is rightfully ours. Years from now, my people will be forced to live in mobile homes on reservations. Your people will wear cardigans and drink highballs. We will sell our bracelets by the roadside. You will play golf and enjoy hot hors d'oeuvres. My people will have pain and degradation. Your people will have stick shifts. Does anyone know what that's from? It's from a movie in the early 90s.
I have no
You got
clue.
me. No earthly idea.
Any guess, Father Boyd?
I feel like I ought to know.
I'm like, maybe I should know this.
I mean, I don't know if you all would know this or not, but it's.
Give us a clue. Give us a clue.
Addams
Family?
Yes, Addams Family Values.
Yeah,
The sequel. You haven't seen that? Has anyone seen that? Yeah, it was one of my favorite movies growing up. And there was this. They were doing the first Thanksgiving play, and Wednesday is dressed up in Native American. Yes, that was Wednesday.
That was
And
Wednesday.
yeah, and she just goes completely off script, and says that, and then everyone's shocked, and then like all of the Native American kids that are dressed up, they end up burning the entire set down. Yeah.
I'm positive of it. I would remember that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's why I was like, you all would remember this if you watched it. I just watched it last night actually to refresh my memory. I would suggest that's a good Thanksgiving movie for y'all to watch.
So speaking of Thanksgiving movies that nobody's ever heard of, and bouncing off of traditions too, the first year me and my wife celebrated Thanksgiving together. When I went over to her house, her and her sister were like, "Oh, it's time to watch, our Thanksgiving movie or tradition that we always do," and it was this cartoon that I had never in my life heard of. And every time I brought it up to somebody else, nobody's ever heard of it either. It apparently existed, but it was Buttons and Rusty. Has anybody ever heard of this other than her? I just wanted to continue the streak that nobody has ever heard of this Thanksgiving movie, that they were shocked that I had never heard of it.
I feel like Bowling just used us to settle a disagreement.
I did. Now it's recorded. It is set in stone.
It's set in stone. Nobody's ever
and I will sleep on the couch.
that sounds like you won.
Yeah.
Or lost, depending on,
Yes.
She's always right.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. She's always right.
That's right. One thing I try to watch is the Peanuts Thanksgiving special. I do watch it. I think it was in a bit of controversy last year. I don't remember the reason, but it seems like there was something with. Do you remember, Bowling?
No.
There was something. I don't know. Seems like there's always some kind of controversy with old cartoons, though.
So do you all watch the Macy's Day Parade?
Oh yeah, that
Absolutely.
is something that we watch. Yep.
I mean, it's usually on. I don't know that but let's be honest. It's on, but do you know what I'm doing? I'm scouring the Black Friday ads with my Sharpie marker.
Oh,
that is one of my Thanksgiving Day traditions, believe it or not.
I will say that the Black Friday starting on Thanksgiving has totally ruined Thanksgiving tradition.
Yeah,
Totally ruined. Because the last few years, Mom and my sister, like, as soon as we're done eating, they are out the door, ready to hit the sales. And this is just not Thanksgiving anymore.
Yeah, so we usually have like 3 or 4 sets of things going around, and everybody has their own color Sharpie, and so Black Friday's a big, or used to be, it's not so much anymore, but it used to be a big deal. I mean, like, we had game plans. So like my cousin David was always on security. So if we knew that there was going to be a fight for an item or whatever, he was always the one that went with that person.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm the nice one in the family. So I feel like I always kind of hung back and apologized for the rest of my family during Black Friday. So, but there were a couple of times that we were out. I mean, we would do Thanksgiving and all that kind of stuff and go to sleep for a couple hours and hit the shops at 3 and 4 in the morning and stand in the line. And we don't do that so much anymore. I mean, a bunch of us are a lot older. But yeah, so it's still fun. We go through the ads, and everybody has ads and Sharpies, and we look and see, and then we're all old, so we go to bed.
I think it's good that companies are taking more seriously the idea of, number one, giving employees time off during those the holiday season, but just running the sales online and doing it for the week, or whatever, like, that's so much more convenient, and it gives people rest. And I just wish they would do that permanently. I know now with the pandemic, there's going to be a lot of that. I think a lot of companies have already announced they're going to be closed on Thanksgiving. But I hope that type of thing sticks.
Yeah, there'll be no Black Friday shopping in our family this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always been something that Sarah and her mom and sister, and they make a girls trip, which keeps being one more kid. And so now there's one more new girl that they're adding this year, but they're not going shopping this year. They're actually just going to go to a cabin instead. So they're going to keep their tradition of doing something on it, but go to a cabin and stay away from the crowds.
And we've had the tradition of going to the theater after Thanksgiving dinner, going to the theater Thanksgiving evening and seeing whatever the new holiday movie is coming out. I think for several years the Lord of the Rings came out around that time. So that was our part of our annual pilgrimage, was to see the Lord of the Rings on Thanksgiving Day evening.
Is the drive-in doing anything for the barter for Thanksgiving?
I don't know.
I know they're advertising A Christmas Carol and Frosty as the 2 plays for December. But I didn't know if there's anything in November or not.
Yep, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Sleepy Hollow is still on.
Oh, really?
It may end. They may have a little gap there. I bet usually their holidays start around Thanksgiving or right after.
Mhm.
I think I would be surprised if Frosty did not start around that time. We have tickets to see Frosty on the 11th of December.
Yeah. We went back in the summer to watch Wizard of Oz when they were doing that. And I got to watch maybe 15 minutes of it. And my Equinox battery goes dead.
Oh, no.
And so then I'm basically trying to get a boost. And my brother-in-law was there. So he comes to give me a boost. And it was the 2015 Equinox. It has a weird configuration, so you can't really get to the battery. It's underneath a bunch of stuff inside the hood, underneath the hood. So I have no idea how to charge this thing. So we mess around with it for like 30, 45 minutes, and then I called my dad, who is a mechanic, and I was like, I don't know how to charge this thing. It's the dumbest question ever, but how do you charge a vehicle? And he's like, there should be a rod. He said it'll be color coded in red. He said, should be a rod that's sticking up somewhere underneath the hood, that's basically the positive charge. He's like, you don't have a negative on these models. You just have a positive. Just hook up that and let it charge. And I was like, well, that's simple. So I did that and finally got it charged. But then I got to basically watch the last 10 minutes of the show, and that was it. So I definitely want to watch another play.
So, great, unique memory, at least. Not exactly the play itself.
Yeah,
but...
yeah. It was the best play I've ever watched.
Sounds like a comedy of errors.
That's right. Well, I guess let's jump into a more of a Eucharist centered discussion. First, I would like to ask Father Boyd a question to answer specifically for my mom, and that is, where does the word Eucharist come from, and why do we use it? Because she had never heard of the word before when I was talking about it the other night. She was like, "What is that?" And I don't think I'd heard the term Eucharist before I started coming to the Episcopal Church either. So, do you mind answering that?
Yeah, well, Eucharist comes from Eucharista. It does mean, Thanksgiving as well. I'm not sure I know the complete etymology of that word or how it came to be used, but it does mean Thanksgiving. So.
Yeah, I think at least the traditions I'm familiar with, communion and the Lord's Supper was the primarily used terms for that. So yeah, did you have any, I guess, discussion points or topics to guide us on this, Father Boyd?
Yeah, well, I guess when I think about the Eucharist, my mind always begins with the Passover story and the Exodus. If you recall the Exodus story, Exodus 12 and the Passover, it is interesting that in Exodus 12 it talks about the first Passover, but it also gives directions for its remembrance in the future. It's very, very interesting that while the Jewish people are leaving, there are also instructions for how to remember it. And it's interesting. It reads like a liturgy. I mean, there's very specific directions. If you look in Exodus 12, I have it here in case I need to refer to it, but it says what to eat this lamb the same night, eat the whole lamb, share it, specific ways to share it with a family if possible, or join together with neighbors, eat it roasted over the fire, unleavened bread with bitter herbs, and then eat with your loins girded, sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and eat in a hurry. So the specific instructions how to have this meal, and so the Passover to today is still pretty well a scripted meal as well. And there's the fancy theological word I like in conjunction with the Eucharist. My favorite word is anamnesis, which means remembering. It's a deep remembering. And so, especially with the Passover, when Jewish families celebrate the Passover, they eat the same food, the bitter herbs that remind of the slavery under Pharaoh. It's such a deep remembering that it's a participation in the original Passover, in the original Passover meal. So it's interesting. We have this meal with the Passover, and then we have a meal with the Eucharist. And I think with the Eucharist, we have a very, my theology is very similar with that. Anamnesis is key to that. It's a deep remembering of Christ's life, death, and resurrection. I look at it not only as the Last Supper, but as his ministry and passion, the whole aspect of his of Christ's life, a deep remembering of that, such that it's a participation in it, so that through the Eucharist, our theology is that it transcends space, so that there's only one Eucharist because it's such a deep remembering. We celebrate with our brothers and sisters on the other side of the world. We celebrate with those who have gone before us and those who come after us. One of my favorite, maybe pop cultural references to the Eucharist is what's that Sissy Spacek movie, Places in the Heart. I don't know if you've seen that movie. It's a little dated now. It's really good though. If you haven't seen it, it would be a great church discussion movie. The movie begins, interestingly, with a little church service, and then the people are leaving the church, and you see families gathered around their tables in their homes, and it's interesting. In one of the families, there's a big pile of bread on the table, so there's some very Eucharistic subtleties there. And then when the father, Sally Fields, I'm sorry, I may have said Sissy Spacek, but Sally Fields is the woman in the movie. Her husband gets called away from the dinner. He's a sheriff because there's a young black boy who's had too much to drink, and he's gotten hold of a firearm, and he's taking pot shots down by the railroad tracks. So he goes to check that out and to stop it. The kid is very intoxicated and ends up shooting the sheriff and killing him. Ends up shooting and killing him. A white sheriff, young black man, southern Texas town with an white supremacist community. And they take matters into their own hands and take the life of the young black child, drag him through the town. Very, very, gut-wrenching scene.
Wow.
But and so there's all these twists and turns in the movies. Sally, the family has a cotton plantation, and so lots of twists and turns and family drama through the movie. There's a man who has an affair with his wife, and she throws him out of the house. But the movie makes a circle, and at the end of the movie, you find them back in the church, and it's a little more Protestant service, I think, than what I'm more familiar with. But they're passing the tray of communion cups, and they're passing the tray, and everybody, essentially everybody that has been in the movie is in the pews. The sheriff is in the pew sitting next to his wife. The black boy that shot him is there beside him.
Oh, wow.
the 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 man and woman who are having such marital problems are holding hands there in the church. So there's all this a theme of reconciliation and this theme of reuniting and coming back together in the communion. So it's a really, really powerful scene. But it reminds me of how in the communion, and I feel that specifically we just had All Saints and All Souls Day that we celebrate. I really feel this presence of one communion, one Eucharist during All Saints Day, very dramatically, and really feel the presence of those who have gone before me, my beloved relatives, and all the communion of saints gathered around the table, especially on that day. But as Mother Gata, one of my spirituality professors, said, you know, the curtain between heaven and earth is particularly porous in the Eucharist, is how she would say that, and also remind us that the celebrant of the Eucharist, the celebrant of communion, is sort of a stand-in. The true, we often refer to that as the presider or the officiant. Sometimes the celebrant. There's a trend to get away from that word celebrant, because the whole congregation in our tradition is viewed as celebrating together. But the true priest is Christ himself of the one Eucharist. So those are a few thoughts and connections with the Passover. I thought I'd just take a break and see if y'all want to add anything or share any thoughts. Or
I think it's really interesting, just the dynamics of the time aspect of the Lord's Supper and partaking of the Lord's Supper. That's not something I wasn't aware of until, I mean, this past year, I guess, when you went through the instructed Eucharist and everything, and just realizing that we are partaking in something that is not that goes outside of space and time, and we are partaking as one.
yeah.
That is amazing to me. So that's my general thoughts on that.
So I think as you were talking, Father Boyd, and I was, reflecting on the traditions, one that I'm in now that I've spent the majority of my life in, but also the traditions of my growing up years, which were very different. And I heard a couple things that you were talking about, and we were reflecting on the movie, the fact that the Israelites were commanded to join with their neighbors, if they couldn't consume all of that, to join. So for me, the Eucharist has always been this communal meal. It's something that we don't do it single. It's not what I do. It would be inappropriate for me, even as a clergy person, to engage in that by myself. And I think with the pandemic, it's something that we have struggled with theologically. Like, so in the United Methodist Church, our bishop has given us permission to preside over the Eucharist or communion virtually, but many of us have really struggled with that and have chosen not to. And I'm in that camp of choosing not to do that. So it's made it real. Because I just don't think you can do that singularly. It is a gathering around the table, if you will. And I love the imagery that you talked about, through time. That is something that we partake as followers of Christ. We celebrate that with all followers of Christ, even those that we don't know and see. And, so those are some of my thoughts.
I mean, it's really the ultimate Thanksgiving family meal. I mean, it's your church family united all across, generations across the world. And that's a pretty beautiful thing. Like, sometimes in, the real world, you can't always travel to meet them, but, through the oneness of being in the body of Christ, you can. Mm-hmm. And I like that connection too. I think it's an appropriately named given to it. And I think it fits well into the Thanksgiving discussion because, like, as Paul tells us in, 1 Thessalonians, we should give thanks in all things. That can be hard to do sometimes. And the source of the Christian hope of being able to give thanks in all things is Christ, is the divine life that we are able to share with him in the Eucharist. And so that being the source of that hope that we're able to give thanks, it makes sense that it's named that, really.
How has the pandemic either changed or affected your view or your partaking in the Eucharist this year? I know I think I've taken it one time since March, and I feel in exile a lot, honestly. So I just any thoughts on that?
I will say that when we started in-person outside worship, communion was the highlight. Of course, I think anytime you're together and you're celebrating the Eucharist, that's the pinnacle of that worship service. But we really wanted to focus on that. And as we were participating in the liturgy and as a deacon in the Methodist Church, my role in that is the physical breaking of the bread and the presenting of the juice as the liturgy is done. It was incredibly emotional for me. I mean, it was indescribable because it had been so long. And and so I long for that. I long for sharing that meal with my brothers and sisters. So, I mean, I always think that it was a highlight for me, but I will never forget that first moment after the pandemic started of breaking that bread. And I honestly thought I was going to have to like blow my nose in the middle of the service. I was crying so hard. So it was just such an emotional, gut wrenching kind of response to that.
We've had in-person mass for a while, obviously very limited in distance, but I think the two things that were the most hard were that, like you said, that initial part where we didn't have it, and it was, a few months, especially when it hit during Easter, that not being a time when you can be, at mass with the Eucharist was really tough. And then the second one, I think I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, was, it was my oldest daughter's year for First Communion this year. And that was delayed by many, many months. It was originally supposed to be on Mother's Day. Didn't happen then. And when it did happen, it was on a day that Sarah's mom was not able to go because she was having to quarantine because of some of the COVID stuff. So like, it was just, it hurt a little bit, or a lot bit really, that, the physical nature of having people there wasn't able to happen the same way it normally would.
I guess my thinking has had to shift or morph a little bit over the course of the pandemic. I never expected it to last this long. I was hoping that we did the 2 or 3 week lockdown and was hoping that things would return to normal soon. So when we sort of started the shutdown at St. Thomas, we've not missed a Sunday of having some sort of service. If it was not just me and my smartphone streaming to Facebook Live, we've done something every Sunday. But we have a tradition of morning prayer, which comes from the daily office. That was a beautiful service and is a beautiful service, but it was a beautiful service that was probably prior to the mid-70s, probably celebrated 3 Sundays a month in the Episcopal Church with the communion 1 Sunday a month. So it just made sense to me to go back to morning prayer in the daily office at the beginning of the pandemic. And so I had some concern that it was a tradition that had been lost as well, and that needed to be brought back, and people needed to experience the daily office. And so why not? So we did morning prayer for a while, and typically there were four of us there. Me, the organist husband would sing while she played the organ, and then my wife Kathy would assist me with the service. So there'd be four of us there, typically, and then the cell phone out in the congregation, which was very challenging to preach to a cell phone and not the faces I'm used to seeing. You can't get an amen or a laugh or a smile or a head nod even out of a cell phone out in the middle.
It is exhausting to preach to a camera.
It is exhausting to preach. It's hard. It is hard to preach to a camera.
Yeah.
And then several people in our parish, and I felt like it was kind of selfish for the four of us to do communion on our own there with the parish gone. I mean, I felt like if they were fasting, from participation, that I should do that in solidarity. But several people argued and wanted the Eucharist even if they watched it over live stream. Now, one thing that I did do, and I did have small communion service and bless some bread in person, and then distribute that to people who wanted it, and then they could watch when we had communion, and they had some blessed bread that they could eat with us and consume with us. And I felt like that was sort of the limit of my comfortability with sort of a virtual communion. But I think it, as things stretched on, though, I think it became important to go back to doing communion and shifted because it became, I think, another, I'll just make a subtle transition here. Another scripture that I pulled for our discussion is Luke 24 or Luke 24:13, the road to Emmaus. The road to Emmaus. And when I think about this, I like it that Jesus is walking down this road, and there's these disciples, and they're really, really struggling with all that's going on. They've come through Good Friday and Holy Saturday, and Jesus sort of says, "What's up? What's going on with you guys? And what are you discussing with each other while you're walking along?" And they sort of look at him and they say, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place?" And they're like, they're way up here at 11 with, "Oh my goodness, don't you know what's going on in the world?" And that's sort of where we are, I think, today with the pandemic, and things, keep the charts are going up pretty fast, and our crazy political cycle, and are you the only one that doesn't know what's going on? And I can think of Jesus coming up beside us and saying, "Hey, what's going on?" And we're saying, "It's a pandemic and crazy elections, and don't you know what's going on?" And Jesus walking beside us and saying, "Oh, let's calm down here just a second. Let's take a breath. Let's take a breath." And they said, we'd hoped he would be the one to redeem Israel. And so then Jesus walks along, and the scriptures are revealed to them, that they find Christ in God's word. They find God in God's word, and God's word comes alive to them through his interpretation and talking about the scriptures. And then they're about to have dinner. They're about to have this supper, and they sort of have to beg Jesus to come in, and they invite him in, and it sounds like he sort of hems and haws around, and so they convince Jesus to come in, and they sit around this table, and they invite him in. So there's this intentionality, I think, of inviting Jesus into our presence during this time of pandemic and crisis, maybe. And then the switch happens. Jesus is the guest, but then somehow he becomes the host. I don't know if you noticed that, but he starts out the guest, but then they say stay with us because it's almost evening, and so he comes in. But then it says, so he went in to stay with them, and when he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were open, and they recognized him, and they recognized him in the breaking of the bread in his presence.
Yep.
So this sort of is where I am with the sort of one part of the pandemic and Eucharist is we need this inviting Christ in to our presence at this time, and we feel like Jesus is particularly present in the breaking of the bread, especially in communion, that Jesus is particularly present, and we need him more than ever to be particularly present with us. And I think that's where I am with that at the moment. And I think it's a good place to be, and probably where I will stay to try to be centered. But we remember that Christ is with us and God is with us at this time.
Amen.
Yeah, I love that. That's good.
Yeah, it's great. So I guess let's think of one thing to put a nice bow on this discussion. Let's think of one thing that we're thankful for this year, specifically 2020, with all the chaos, with all the pandemics, with all the election noise. One thing that we are particularly thankful for this year. I'll start.
Go.
I am thankful for you guys, for all of you on this call. I think you have been instrumental in keeping me sane. Father Boyd, with your spiritual guidance and all of the different things we've went through with the confirmation classes, and I'm going through EFM now, and that's been a big help. And it's just keeping my mind busy, and I think that's been a big help to not really think about what's going on a lot. And then of course this podcast has been just a delight. I have absolutely loved doing this. So I'm absolutely in 2020. I think all of you are a highlight for me.
Well, how the heck are we supposed to follow that?
I don't know. Good luck.
Well, I'm going to go next and cheat before somebody steals my boring answer. But I'm going to go with family because, you have to live with them every day, But I think that, they call family the domestic church. And so, and I think my family, I've been lucky to have a family that, you never have to worry about whether they're going to be there for you or anything like that. That they're always there. And that's kind of like a taste of that divine, family that you get with God. So I think that they've been able to center me for my whole life, and it's obviously continued on to this day, and that's nice to just know that you have that.
So I think for me, of course, the pandemic was enough, but the Methodist Church has an itinerant system, and my husband's a clergy person, and he got moved in the midst of the pandemic. And it has been very interesting in starting that. I mean, I'm still in ministry in Southwest Virginia. But for me, I think through this whole thing has reinforced, I mean, I kind of knew it, but in my soul, the affirmation that God is the same yesterday as God is today, as God is tomorrow. And that is something that I have found myself clinging to as everything that we knew for the last 7 years changed. That is what I had to cling to in the midst of the pandemic. So I think that I'm extremely thankful for that affirmation. But if we want to go with something cheesy that I am thankful for, I'm really thankful for my pets. It's been a tough year, and I don't care if it's an hour or 8 hours. You walk through that door, and if you don't have a dog, you may not understand this, but that dog is so happy to see you. And that has just been sometimes the spark in my day after kind of dealing with everybody else's burdens as well, to be able to come in that and see somebody who's just like super excited to see you. And, so the fact that God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and my dog and my cat. I mean, we can't leave Fat Fortune out.
Well, I'm definitely grateful for my wife, Kathy. We have hunkered down together and tried to keep each other sane, and watched a lot of Mandalorian and Schitt's Creek together, and tried to keep things real. We've gotten on each other's nerves a few times, of course, but also thankful for my church family, and I have a clergy colleague group that I'm very, very thankful for, that works on family systems theory. It's out of Atlanta, and so that's been this whole thing, I think, has really stretched clergy and lay people. It's stretched all of us, and we've had to really it's brought out our idiosyncrasies, and so we've had to wrestle with our demons a little bit, many of us during this time, and pray through them, and try to give them to God. And but I'm very thankful for my wife and my church family, and then my support system, which is the Columbia Theological Seminary group that I'm in.
Awesome. And I'll just say that I'm very thankful for my family, my wife, and all my pets before I get in trouble.
Peyton's gonna be growling at you in a second.
They're all going to get mad if I don't say that. So, yes. Okay. So now we've got a top 5 that Father Boyd gave us this week. So
I'm
segue.
so excited.
Oh,
Yes.
I'm scared.
I'm very scared.
All right. Segue. Appalachian Liturgy Top 5 Debate. To our top 5. All right. So this week we are doing top 5 80s bands. And surprisingly, I knew a lot of them and listened to a lot of them. So even though I was born in 86. So
Such a baby.
I know. Father Boyd, you want to kick us off with your number 5 in your list?
I had trouble with this because,
You came up with it.
and I almost wondered, the question I asked myself, do I have stronger opinions about 80s bands or the Eucharist, was a question I had to wrestle with. I was a DJ in the 80s. I was a DJ in the 80s, and starting about 1982, my best friend was a couple years older than me, and he was a DJ at the college radio station, and I would go help him with his radio show, and then he relocated and I took over his radio show. So I was a DJ in the 80s for, I'm thinking 4 years-ish, or involved with radio. So my number 5, I went to 10, and I'll skip maybe, I'll give you 7, 6, and 5, if that's okay.
Yeah, we sneak in some alternate honorable mentions every now and then.
Yeah.
We call them honorable mention.
Honorable mention.
Yeah.
Honorable mention. And it's really tough. Honorable mention, Elvis Costello.
Okay.
honorable mention, The Pretenders.
Oh yeah.
And then number 5, The Violent Femmes. The Violent Femmes.
That means
no
that
clue.
means nothing to me.
Means nothing to you. They are making a comeback. It's interesting. I've heard them recently in several just on the essentially radio-ish or movie scenes or things like that. But they are one of the Violent Femmes, were one of those sort of I don't know if they were from Athens, Georgia, but they were a small-ish band that really they were not. They have very unique, distinct sound, very almost fraternity rock, sort of basic sound. So yeah.
Okay. Go on. Your number 4.
My number 4 is the Talking Heads.
Oh.
Something I hope y'all heard the Talking Heads. Talking Heads was a great band in the 80s. David Byrne. I don't know if you're familiar with the Tom Tom Club, but the rhythm section of Talking Heads, Tom Tom Club had a song "Genius of Love" that was early 80s hit and MTV hit, but Tom Tom Club was a rhythm section essentially, and they formed the rhythm section of Talking Heads. So that was good.
Okay. Your number 3?
My number 3 is REM.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you could, maybe I could call it number 3 REM, B-52s, Violent Femmes, but they sort of all fall in that same Athens, Georgia-ish sort of circle. But love REM.
Number 2?
Number 2 is The Replacements. Yeah.
Yep.
David, The Replacements, Paul Westerberg's band. And it's probably, you may not have heard of The Replacements, but they probably, I want to say that there's a link there, a sonic link between them and the grunge of the 90s as well.
Keanu Reeves was in that band, right?
No,
That's
Paul
the movie.
Westerberg.
All right. And your number 1?
Is The Clash.
Clash. Okay. Yep.
Too
Very good.
esoteric, right?
All right. Bowling, would you like to go?
Sure. Mine's a little bit different. So I have listened to a lot of 80s music, but my problem was I guess for me, like the mid 70s, 80s, and even kind of early 90s were like one big decade in my head. And I had a hard time determining what was an 80s band. Is this an 80s band? I'd look it up and like they'd be formed in 1978. And I'm like, does that count? Does that not count? And I just gave up. And
You thought too much.
I did. But yeah, so a slightly different theme than Father Boyd's, but number 5, Guns N' Roses, what I started off with.
Yep.
Number 4 went with Bon Jovi.
Okay. Very good.
Don't ever mention.
Yeah. AC/DC at 3.
Very good.
Journey at 2.
Hmm.
Aerosmith, rounding out the top 5 at number 1.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. All right, I'll go. So my number 5, and this was petitioned by my wife because it's one of her favorite bands. She's in love with Bret Michaels, always has been, and it's Poison. And I'm not a huge Poison fan, but she said it had to be on my top 5 list. So it's
I
there.
had all their cassette tapes.
Did you?
Mhm.
Yeah. So Poison's my number 5. My number 4 is AC/DC. And I had the same struggle that Bowling did because I was the requirements of 80s band to me was pretty vague. I was like, does this include single artists or does it have to be a band?
I had the same thing too.
So I went with the strict interpretation of band, and otherwise Michael Jackson would have been on here.
Yeah.
And he's not on here. My number 3 is Goo Goo Dolls. And they are, I think they are more of a 90s and
That's what I was going to
band,
say too. I thought that was
but
more
they
90s.
formed in 87. So and I'm a big Goo Goo Dolls fan, so I was like, it's going to be on there.
Okay, I put Nirvana then because they were formed in 1989 on December the 20th.
Well, there
Ooh,
I don't know.
that's pretty
I
close to
decided-
90.
I decided Nirvana didn't count, or they would have been on my list.
Yeah. I did look them up too, just in case they were formed. They weren't.
Yeah. My number 2 is Bon Jovi, and my number 1 is Aerosmith. All right, Brooke.
All right. So I knew that I would be the only one with my number 5.
Okay.
And it's a very chick thing. But my number 5 80s band was the Bangles.
Okay.
I mean, Walk
Okay.
Like an
Walk
Egyptian,
Like an
Yep.
Eternal Flame, Manic Monday. I mean, you know. So then my number 4 was Journey. So, Don't Stop Believing, Any Way You Want It. I mean, number 3 was REO Speedwagon. And number 2 was Guns N' Roses. Gosh, Welcome to the Jungle and Sweet
Yeah.
Child of Mine. And then my number 1 was Aerosmith.
Wow. We all had number 1 at Aerosmith except for Father Boyd. Wow.
I was into the punk scene, so if you didn't figure that out.
Yeah.
I
was
could have been with you on 90s punk, but I don't know if I could. I don't know too many 80s punk.
Yeah, me either.
So what do you think of when you think of 90s punk?
That is where I go to Nirvana at first. but-
Nirvana.
Yeah.
I was going to put Green Day because I believe they formed in the 80s as well. And that would
Did
be
they?
90s punk. I think so.
There's no way.
I think they
So
did.
I had a couple honorable mentions. I had
Okay.
Fleetwood Mac,
Yeah.
Okay.
honorable mention. I had Genesis
Okay.
and Run DMC.
I swear I almost put Run DMC on there too.
I had Run DMC Beastie Boys as an honorable
Yay.
mention.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I also had Sugar Hill Gang as an honorable mention, but I don't
I
know.
hadn't thought
I
about
only know one song of Sugar Hill Gang.
Great.
This was fun. I mean,
It
I'm
was.
happy
It was-
the day that we've had, or the week we've had.
It was good. I enjoyed researching to see what actually was an 80s band because I had to look up all of these.
Yeah.
All right. So what's our top 5?
Well, we had many duplicates. We had Aerosmith. That's our number 1, right? I think Journey was duplicated a couple of times. So Aerosmith, Journey, Guns N' Roses was on 2 lists. So we could put Guns N' Roses.
We gotta pull something from Father Boyd.
Yeah.
so.
What would you like? Because I don't know that any of us.
I can definitely go with REM.
I could
Yeah,
too. I like REM.
I had
Okay.
REM as an honorable mention. So
Yep. All right. So REM, and we need one more. Do we have any more duplicates? AC/DC was. Bon Jovi was.
listen, I'd be happy with any and all of them. Like, I know what I'm going to be listening to on the way to Virginia tomorrow morning.
She'll be living on a prayer.
Let's do Bon Jovi. How about that? All right. So our final list is Journey, Guns N' Roses, Aerosmith, REM, and Bon Jovi.
Cool.
Well, that was a fun exercise.
Yeah.
Thank you
Good topic. I like it.
Good,
Yeah.
thank you, Father Boyd, for that. That was really fun. All right. Well, this was a great discussion. Thanks, Father Boyd, for joining us. Hope to have you back. I know one topic I would absolutely like to get you to come back and talk about is science and faith. I feel like that would be a good one to talk about, and there's a lot of things we can touch on there. So sometime.
I talk about Teilhard de Chardin, and maybe I could talk about him a little. I don't know if there's a good way to do that over Zoom, but when I think of science and faith, I think of Teilhard de Chardin, and I don't know if you know. Yeah, does that ring a bell with anybody? Teilhard de Chardin.
Mm-mm.
Teilhard de Chardin was a Jesuit, and he was a paleontologist, and he actually was on the team that discovered Peking man. And he wrote quite a bit. The end of the 19th century, early 20th century. I think he died in the 60s. He was a Roman Catholic, but most of his writings were banned by the Catholic Church, and they said, why don't you stay in China and keep digging up those bones that you like to do, and just don't talk about anything like evolution that you might be thinking about while you're out digging up those bones. And he had some really, really, really interesting things. I think he was very aware of Einstein's work with relativity at the time, and of course evolution, and
Yeah.
Interestingly, some of his writings even foreshadow the internet.
Oh, wow.
As well. It's really, really interesting stuff. But he has a theology that combines he has a Christology that incorporates evolution. That is just his theology of Jesus is evolution is going towards Christ.
That's interesting. I would love to hear about that.
So I need the name of this fellow and the name of the movie that you were talking about earlier. Like, those are two things that I need.
The name of the movie is Places in the Heart. Places in the Heart. And Pierre Teilhard de Chardin.
Okay.
And his book about evolution is called The Phenomenon of Man, and it is not an easy read, especially for somebody without a scientific background.
Yeah.
It's a bummer, but and he was French, so most of his stuff is translated. A lot of it is online in PDF form for free, though.
Ooh,
Great.
Even better.
Yeah, free is better.
As someone who spends too much money on books already.
But yeah, we will make a plan to definitely do an episode on science and faith, and you can talk all about that. I know Francis Collins is one that I would like to talk about. BioLogos, that organization. A lot of things related to science and faith that I think we can touch on.
This is what I've been reading recently is Walter Brueggemann's Virus is a Summons to Faith. It is a really challenging, interesting read, and he delves, I guess he wrote it in April or May or something like that, put it out then, but he doesn't shy away from politics either. It's really, really interesting.
Good stuff. All right. Well, Father Boyd, thank you so much for being on. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. And peace be with you, and have a good night.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.